More than 4 centuries ago, an entire English colony vanished from the American landscape, and no one could say for certain where its people had gone. In 1590, John White returned to Roanoke Island expecting to find the settlers he had left behind 3 years earlier. Instead, he found an abandoned settlement swallowed by silence. The people were gone. Their homes stood empty. There were no clear signs explaining what had happened. Only a mysterious word carved into a wooden post offered a possible clue. CROATOAN. Another carving simply read, CRO. 3 years earlier, more than 100 English settlers had arrived on Roanoke Island, hoping to establish a permanent colony in the New World. Among them were families, craftsmen, farmers, and children, all facing the enormous challenge of surviving in an unfamiliar land. John White, the colony's governor, eventually returned to England to obtain desperately needed supplies. But his return was delayed by war and political tensions, turning what should have been a short absence into years. When he finally sailed back toward Roanoke, he expected to see familiar faces and signs of life. Instead, he found a settlement without its people. White had previously agreed with the colonists that if they were forced to leave, they would carve the name of their destination into a visible location. CROATOAN appeared to point toward a nearby region associated with indigenous communities. Yet before White could properly investigate, severe weather forced him away from the island. The settlers had disappeared, and the clues only deepened the mystery. Were they relocated? Did they join another community? Or did something happen that history has never been able to fully explain? The Lost Colony of Roanoke had vanished, leaving behind one of America's most enduring historical mysteries. The mystery of Roanoke began long before the colony disappeared. In 1587, a group of more than 100 English settlers crossed the Atlantic under the leadership of John White, determined to establish a permanent English settlement in the New World. Unlike an expedition focused only on exploration, this colony included entire families, making its survival far more important to England's ambitions in North America. The settlers landed on Roanoke Island, an area already connected to earlier English attempts at colonization. They faced an unfamiliar environment, limited supplies, unpredictable weather, and the enormous challenge of building a community far from England. Among the colonists was John White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, who gave birth to a child named Virginia Dare shortly after their arrival. Virginia became the first English child born in the territory that would eventually become the United States. Her birth was celebrated as a symbol of hope for the struggling settlement. But life on Roanoke was difficult, and the colonists needed additional supplies if they were going to survive. John White made the difficult decision to return to England, promising to come back with provisions as quickly as possible. He could not have known that circumstances across the Atlantic would keep him away far longer than expected. When White left the island, the settlers remained behind, surrounded by uncertainty and dependent on the success of his return. The colony's future seemed fragile, but no one could have imagined that this departure would become the beginning of one of America's greatest unsolved historical mysteries. John White expected to return to Roanoke quickly, but history had other plans. When he reached England, he found the country caught in growing tensions with Spain. The threat of the Spanish Armada demanded ships, sailors, and resources, making it difficult for White to secure a vessel for his journey back to the colony. What should have been a temporary absence stretched into years. Meanwhile, the settlers on Roanoke were left without the supplies they desperately needed. Their situation was made even more uncertain because White had no reliable way to communicate with them across the Atlantic. Every passing month increased the risk facing the isolated colony. Eventually, England's circumstances allowed White to arrange another expedition, and in 1590 he finally sailed back toward North America. After years of waiting, he was finally approaching the place where he had left his daughter, granddaughter, and fellow colonists. But the reunion he imagined would never happen. As the expedition reached the area, White searched for signs that the settlement was still occupied. Instead, the island appeared strangely quiet. When the colonists' abandoned settlement came into view, the reality became impossible to ignore. The people were gone. Their possessions and buildings suggested that the colony had not simply disappeared overnight. Yet there was no clear explanation for where everyone had gone. White searched for messages or markings that might reveal their destination. Then he discovered the word, CROATOAN, carved into a wooden post. Nearby, another clue reportedly read, CRO. White remembered the agreement he had made with the colonists before leaving. If they were forced to move, they were supposed to carve the name of their destination into a visible object. The carving seemed to offer an answer, but it created an even greater mystery. Why had the settlers left? Where had they gone? And why was there no clear evidence of their fate? The carving of CROATOAN became the most famous clue in the Roanoke mystery, but it did not provide a simple answer. CROATOAN was the name associated with an indigenous community living on nearby CROATOAN Island, now known as Hatteras Island. Some historians believe the colonists may have moved there voluntarily, possibly seeking food, protection, or a more sustainable place to live. There is evidence that English settlers and indigenous communities had interacted before, making cooperation or assimilation possible. Another possibility is that the colonists divided into smaller groups and moved to different locations rather than staying together. Some may have joined nearby communities, while others could have traveled farther inland. Yet the historical record becomes increasingly uncertain after 1590. There are later reports and stories suggesting that Europeans may have encountered people who appeared to have connections with the missing colonists, but none provides conclusive proof. Other theories are darker. The settlers may have faced disease, hunger, conflict, or environmental difficulties that forced them to abandon Roanoke. Some researchers have also considered the possibility that the colony was attacked, although the lack of clear archaeological evidence makes such claims difficult to prove. The mystery became even more complicated because John White never had the opportunity to conduct a complete investigation. His expedition was forced to leave before he could search the surrounding islands and mainland thoroughly. He returned to England without his daughter, granddaughter, or the other colonists. For the rest of his life, White never discovered their final destination. Over time, the unanswered questions surrounding Roanoke transformed the vanished settlement into a legend. But behind the legend were real families who had left England hoping to build a new life, only to disappear from the historical record. More than 400 years have passed since the settlers of Roanoke disappeared, yet their story remains one of America's most enduring historical mysteries. Researchers continue to examine archaeological discoveries, historical documents, indigenous traditions, and the landscape of the region for evidence that might reveal what happened. Some theories suggest that the colonists gradually joined nearby indigenous communities and became part of their societies. Others propose that different groups moved inland or toward the Chesapeake region in search of food and safety. Disease, drought, conflict, and the harsh realities of life in an isolated colony have also been considered. Yet none of these explanations has been proven beyond doubt. The greatest mystery is the absence of a definitive record describing the settlers' final years. John White left Roanoke expecting to return, but when he finally came back, his daughter, granddaughter, and the other colonists were gone. The word CROATOAN may have pointed toward their destination, but it never revealed what happened afterward. Archaeological research continues to search beyond the original settlement, and every discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that remains incomplete. Perhaps the colonists survived and built new lives somewhere beyond Roanoke. Perhaps their community slowly disappeared through hardship and assimilation. Or perhaps the truth lies somewhere between the many theories that have emerged over centuries. The Lost Colony remains powerful because the mystery is not simply about where the settlers went. It is about the lives they left behind, the families who waited for their return, and a final chapter that history never recorded. Somewhere among the forests, islands, and coastline of America's earliest colonial frontier, the answer may still be waiting to be found.